Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today with Susan Sofayov. Had to get that right. Today, Susan will share her journey of her bipolar diagnosis at the age of 46, why it saved her marriage, enabled her to achieve her dream of writing her book, Defective, which has offered hope and insight to many readers. We welcome you today, Susan, to share your story.
Thank you, Debbie. And I want to first of all thank the International Bipolar Foundation for inviting me to do this and to speak with you all today. I'm thrilled to be here, and a little honest, I'm a little nervous. So let me get started here. Hang on a second. I gotta get this. Okay. First of all, let me begin with a disclaimer of what I'm not. I am not a psychiatrist or a therapist. I have no training whatsoever in the field of psychology. In fact, I'm not even a great listener. And I have absolutely no training in the field of medicine other than your basic Red Cross first aid. Finally, I am not a scientific researcher dedicating my life to putting an end to the scourge of mental illness. If my skill set and the skill set of a scientist were put into a Venn diagram, the circles would be on separate pieces of paper in rival neighborhoods. What I am, I'm a wife, and I'm my husband's business partner in running our real estate development and management company. I'm a middle-aged, hot-flashing, suffering mom, and I'm declaring myself middle-aged because I do plan to live to be 106. Which is pretty much a miracle because for large chunks of my life, I couldn't bear the thought of living another hour. I'm a mom of 3 children, all who are either enjoying college life or entry into the world of full-time work. Basically, as of September 1, my husband and I are empty nesters. And as of the last few years, I'm a writer with my second novel being released in December. Now, if you would ask the people in my life the question, who is Susan, I think that add things like friend, daughter, sister-in-law, aunt, but not one of them, I assure you, who knows me, would mention the fact that I have bipolar II disorder. Everything I say today is based on one belief. Bipolar II disorder is something I have, not something I am. A human being cannot be a disorder. A person can be disorderly, but not a disorder. A person is a person, and a disorder is a disorder. You cannot be both. End of semantic class. All right. Anyway, at the ripe old age of 46, I was diagnosed. It was a lovely afternoon, and I walked out of the psychiatrist's office feeling like I had just received the most precious gift ever. I no longer felt alone in the war against my brain. But did I have any understanding of this version of bipolar disorder or any version of bipolar? Not a clue. But I liked the idea of being part of a group and no longer fearing that I had a horrible brain mutation that no one on the planet would ever understand. Mental illness doesn't have to win, but if it does, I won't stop talking until the neighbors send casseroles. I know the title of this talk is a bit odd, so allow me a moment to explain it. My journey with bipolar is closely intertwined with a novel I wrote called Defective, which has a lot to do with not letting mental illness win and absolutely nothing to do with neighbors and casseroles. That is on the surface. When people are diagnosed with cancer, we bring casseroles. When it's mental illness, everyone turns away. This sentence appeared in a book review on Amazon. The statement impressed me with the simplicity in which it states something we all want: mental illness to be treated the same as every other illness in every way, beginning with health insurance that covers appropriate treatment, to maybe someday seeing a law similar to the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978, and the ultimate goal, equal treatment and acceptance by society. Casseroles. Essentially, this title defines the 2 targeted audiences for my novel. Audience 1, the person struggling with undiagnosed bipolar disorder. I wanted to write something that would motivate the undiagnosed person to seek out help and understand that bipolar isn't curable, but it is manageable. The fear that people will find out and pass judgment is not a reason to continue suffering day after day. By not seeking treatment, bipolar, depression, OCD, and many others automatically win the war for your brain. Seeking its treatment is not a sign of weakness. Seeking treatment is fighting back and winning the battle. Make the call, see the doctor. You're better than the rogue chemicals in your brain. Audience number two. Audience number two was everyone who lives with, loves, or knows someone suffering from the illness. Mental illness touches everyone either directly or indirectly. What I wanted to say to these people is the inside of my mind and the mind of every other person diagnosed is not a pretty place. In fact, there are times when we're hard to live with, love, and very difficult to live with. But I believe that if I could give a non-bipolar person even the smallest bit of insight into the head of a person with the illness, it could potentially lead to better coping skills. Understanding something gives you an increased tools to deal with it. And the more people we educate, the closer we'll get to ending the stigma. And then the neighbors will offer us compassion along with those casseroles. What took so long? Before I talk about the novel, I'd like to give you a little background on me. As I said, I was old when I was diagnosed with the disorder, but better late than never. In my mid-20s, I was diagnosed with severe chronic depression. Well, it didn't take Einstein to figure that out. I think I should have received the spent most time paralyzed in bed and still managed to graduate from college award. I accepted the diagnosis of depression and dutifully swallowed my antidepressants, but it didn't stop my episodes. In the antidepressants' defense, it did take away my desire to commit suicide. I grew up in a time when bipolar was still referred to as manic depression. I've never experienced full-blown mania, and I've never been hospitalized, even though I probably should have been a few times, and it may have taken away years of suffering. But up until 2009, I've never heard of bipolar 2 or hypomania. Once it was explained to me, I said, yep, that's me. And while I was growing up, because I remember episodes from a very young age, my parents didn't understand or have any idea how to help me. The bottom line was simple. I always knew I had a problem. I didn't understand it because I never felt like the definitions of depression fit me. These medical definitions sounded like a nice pontoon boat ride when my head felt like the sinking Titanic. The periods between episodes I like to compare to a low-grade fever, low-grade chronic depression. And there were good days, which turned out to be the hypomanic days. And I will tell you, my husband nostalgically calls those the good old days. During hypomania, I didn't just clean the house, I detailed it, sterilized it, and buffed it. At work, the ideas flowed from my amazing ability to see connections between everything in the universe. I felt like a genius. I once had a boss actually tell me during a meeting break that I needed to stop talking because you think too fast and you need to let other people catch up. Well, I guess I may be miserable when I'm off my meds, but I'm a heck of a lot smarter. But inevitably, hypomania led to the crash, the downside. With the rage that has no definable source, depression, and a truckload of self-worthing, complete mental malfunction. Oh, what fun. The crash. Like most people, my diagnosis finally came as my world collapsed around me. During a downward spiral, I quit my job, a job I loved, but that's not the story for today. Unemployment and I don't mix. And bipolar episodes and job interviews don't mix. It was an ugly period that extended for what felt like eternity. But eventually I landed a job with a big company, a job I was terribly overqualified for, but my crushed ego needed to be hired by someone. Underemployment isn't much better than unemployment. So I enrolled in an online writing class. The first class was Unleashing Your Creativity. I never viewed myself as a creative person, but what the heck, it was cheap and my job wasn't stimulating my synapses to snap. Cool class. I signed up for another in short story writing. But during this period, my mood swings fluctuated from debilitating depression to bubbling anger. Well, you know the saying, the innocent bystander always gets shot. The innocent bystander in this case was my poor husband, who had no experience whatsoever with mental illness. He believed if he bolstered my self-confidence, our life together would improve. Poor guy, everything he did to help me triggered the opposite reaction, making life worse. He made the mistake of trying to argue with a sick mind. He's learned a lot over the years, and he is patient, but on bad days, he still raises his hands in the goalpost position and says, I'm backing away slowly. And when he sees a certain look in my eyes, he knows not to say anything stupid like good morning or how are you or the dreaded I love you. I'm sorry for the sidetrack. Well, anyway, eventually I quit the job with the big company and I took over managing my husband's screen printing business, freeing him to spend more time developing our real estate business. By the end of 2008, the poor man couldn't take any more of my mood swings and was seriously considering moving out. Divorce seemed inevitable. In spring of 2009, we started counseling, and my miracle happened. I started crashing on a day before our third session with the therapist, and by the time we sat down in her office the next day, she got to meet the Susan my husband referred to as Ugly Susan. According to him, he married beautiful Susan, not knowing that ugly Susan was part of the deal. I got so upset during this session, I walked out. Later that day, she called me and asked me to come to her office the next day, alone. She explained a few things, but basically, she said I was cognitively distorting so badly that even though she couldn't diagnose, it looked like bipolar 2 disorder to her. I still wasn't in any condition to hear her other than two words, bipolar and distorting. And I think I do recall hearing I needed new medication. She handed me a card for a psychiatrist and urged me to make an appointment. I thought about it and thought about it. It took a few days, but I made the appointment and I started seeing the psychiatrist regularly, and her prediction was confirmed. I acknowledge that I am one of the very lucky ones. My doctor put me on a medication combination, which he said psychiatrists were starting to see good outcomes for people with bipolar 2. My body sucked up that medication like water in a desert. I know it's hard to believe, and people will argue with me, but 20 minutes after swallowing those pills, I felt like someone turned on the lights and my brain quieted. I've heard from many that medication doesn't work fast. It takes 2 weeks. I have no explanation why it hit me fast, but honestly, it was as if my body was begging for the chemical in that pill, and the change was dramatic. Okay, so at this point, I would like to say, and we all lived happily ever after. But when my mind cleared, I got angry, imagining everything I could have accomplished with a clear mind, and it was hard to recognize myself without the filter of self-loathing. When we first got married, my husband teased me that I was an overweight person. Actually, he's not that politically correct. He said I was a fat person living in a skinny person's body. I tried to hide a body I detested with baggy clothes and cover up a horribly ugly face with lots of makeup. But I honestly felt that I was sparing people from my hideousness by doing these things. But now, so many things in my new world were different. I had to learn to see myself differently. I didn't hate myself anymore. I wasn't that bad looking, but I had no idea how to like myself. Thank goodness for therapy. So when I first entered treatment with a psychiatrist, my life was probably best described as much better ever after. Today, I'm living my happily ever after. I've stopped being angry over the what ifs, and I've made peace with myself. Before treatment, I began working on a women's fiction novel about a middle-aged woman confronting a former love, and continued working on it as my mind cleared. Then a few things happened. My father's first cousin, who was from out of town, came to visit. My father died 30 years ago, and this man is the only living member I have from his side of the family. I told him about my diagnosis, and that's all it took for him to launch into our family mental health history. Not so pretty and very shocking. Then, not long after his visit had ended, my daughter came to me asking for help. My outgoing, smart, hardworking, and beautiful daughter was becoming completely paralyzed by depression. Fortunately, as a mom, I knew what to do, and I knew who to call. As my daughter entered treatment, an image formed in my mind that I couldn't shake. It was a college girl who, to make things easier, just for the sake of this talk, I'm going to refer to her as Maggie so I don't have to keep calling her the girl. Here I imagine this college girl, Maggie, alone in her dorm, laying on her bed, curled into fetal position, sobbing. She talked to her mother about the overwhelming feelings she's having, but her mother dismissed it as teenage moodiness or PMS. And then her mother told her she would just grow out of it or get over it. But that was 6 months ago, and the blackness in her mind was getting worse. The truth was, her mother had no experience or understanding of mental illness. Therefore, she had no tools to use to help her daughter. Next, my image of Maggie kind of morphed into her sitting in a chair, gripping a wadded up tissue, listening to a psychiatrist explain a diagnosis that sounded somewhere between a ball and chain and a death sentence. Bipolar disorder, either one or two, it doesn't matter. She has no understanding of the disorder except what she's seen on television. She worries she'll end up in a mental hospital and wonders if bipolar is the mental illness that makes people go into schools and shoot people. Then she thinks of the books and the movies about mental illness. The poor girl is terrified. The psychiatrist mentions a couple of resources and a couple of books and writes the titles on the piece of paper. She immediately rushes home, boots up the computer, and starts searching the internet. Luckily, she finds a significant body of literature relating to mental illness. The majority are memoirs. Now, memoirs can be an enormous source of insight to living with bipolar, but even some of those can be very scary. And what about the people who love Maggie? How do they feel? How can they gain understanding when Maggie doesn't even have the words to describe her thoughts, emotions, and senses? Like most people, what they know is what media presents, and the media presents the most dramatic sides of the illness. How can they have any daughter, and who can help them help her? Well, I no longer had any interest in writing about a middle-aged woman. I wanted to tell Maggie's story. By the way, the middle-aged woman story will be released in December. Writing Maggie's story involved going deep into my own dark places. I think everyone who has ever tried to describe their bipolar to a civilian, I don't like saying normal person, I call them civilians, will agree to this sentence. Most words evolved as a description of the outside world, hence their inadequacy to describe what is going on inside me. Yes, words really are inadequate to describe my mind, but I was determined to give it my best shot. Out of the gate, I knew a few things. I didn't want and couldn't write a memoir. My memories existed through the filter of bipolar II disorder, and I didn't trust my memory. I didn't want to write my life story. I'd lived that one. I hadn't been in treatment long enough to reach any profound conclusions or have some world-altering insight about the disorder, but I needed to share with the world And my life, well, it's just not very exciting. I wanted to write a novel. When I was getting my master's in teaching, I took a lot of classes in children's literature. The big movement at the time, and still is, diversity. Children need to see themselves represented in the books they read. Truthfully, excuse me a minute. Sorry, it's that nervous throat. We all like protagonists in stories that we can relate to, and protagonists that especially reflect some aspect of ourself. It was then I realized that many novels on the subjects of mental illness don't have a protagonist at all. The main character is bipolar or schizophrenia or any other mental illness. We take the people out and leave the disorder. But people diagnosed with bipolar, we fall in love, raise families, have jobs, go to college, get the flu, like to knit, and some of us even do like to bowl. People diagnosed with mental illnesses are all around us. We actually blend into society and don't look like rampaging lunatics. Though I've had more than my share of those moments too, and some of them are completely unrelated to bipolar. My protagonist was not going to be the symptoms. My protagonist was going to be a person who just happened to have bipolar disorder. Now, there's a place in the lexicon of literature for all types of stories about mental illness because it affects so many people in so many different ways. There are excellent books written by people who do not actually have the illness. Their theme is often the impact the mentally ill family member has on the dynamics of the rest of the family. And due to the nature of these books, it's important for the writer to show some of the most dramatic aspects of the illness because these symptoms present the toughest challenges to families. For example, a writer may have a scene where the character with the mental illness is violently throwing things and screaming. But because the story is written from the point of view of a civilian, there is no explanation of the thoughts or the feelings of the person acting out. My husband could write this story. He'll occasionally pontificate on how difficult his life was before I entered treatment and rattled off events that I'd rather not recall. He describes my behavior. I remember the pain I was feeling and the thoughts polluting my brain at the time of the behavior. Every time he starts this discussion, I shoot off my standard response. If you think your life was bad, you can't even imagine mine. Writers share these stories because they offer insight and experience that can inspire other people and their families. But right away, I knew this wasn't the type of story I wanted to write. Actually, since I'm the one with the issues, I don't think I'm even qualified to write it. The only way to get my imaginary young woman out of my head was to write the story in first person and try to translate on the page the thought process of my untreated mind. I wanted the reader to take up residence inside my brain and live there for at least 80,000 words. And since it was going to be a novel, it had to have a real story, and I didn't want the entire story to be centered on bipolar. The novel needed to follow all the conventions of novels. Since real lives do not have a story arc, memoirs aren't often held to the 3-act story threshold. I wanted to create supporting characters that could be role models for people in relationships with a bipolar person. At the same time, I wanted to show the reality, and that is some people are just not equipped, for whatever reason, to deal with people suffering from mental illness. I created both types of characters in my book, and I tried not to pass judgment. But most of all, my main goal was always to offer hope. No one was going to read the last chapter of my book and sob. I wanted to inspire people to move forward. I told myself that if one person finishes my book and feels more hopeful than they did when they opened it, job accomplished. When a young woman receives a bipolar diagnosis, I want her to think about my protagonist, Maggie. So I set up office in my spare bedroom that housed my neglected ironing board and started typing. For 2 months, every free second I could eke out was spent typing the first draft. Laundry piled up. Kids got thinner by the week. Just kidding, I fed them. The first draft was complete. It sucked, but I knew the story I wanted to tell was in there. What I didn't know was the rewrites and the self-editing would take another 1.5 years. My focus remained on helping Maggie, the girl in my head, who ultimately became the protagonist of my story. What I didn't realize at that time, though, was the girl in my head was me. Life doesn't offer do-overs. This was an apology to my 20-year-old self for making her suffer, and I needed to forgive myself for the embarrassing behaviors and the self-medicating with alcohol. Each time I drank too much, I swore I'd never do it again. Each time I said something horrible to a person I love the most, I swore to myself I would never do it again. As the shampoo bottle says, lather, rinse, repeat. My cycle of breaking promises to myself never ended. Writing the novel became a sort of penance for all the shameful things and a quest for forgiveness from the people I hurt the most. I would own up to my behavior by admitting to the world, yes, I do have a mental illness. There I sat, typing, cut, paste, rewrite, download grammar program, study book on writing, download yet another grammar program, until I finally reached the point where I wanted to show the first chapter to someone. I needed a reaction from another writer, especially since I didn't have the courage to show it to a family member or a friend. So I found the website where web authors could anonymously post their stuff for feedback. Now remember, this is my baby. I'm doing my best to follow all the rules by cutting out backstory, eliminating passive verbs, and making sure there are no point of view switches. But most of all, I'm putting my deepest thoughts and feelings into Maggie. And actually, I felt I did a pretty good job capturing the essence of my untreated brain. Ugh. These were not the actual responses I was expecting. The responses were not even in the same universe with my expectations. I didn't expect rave reviews, but I thought that they'd critique my beginner writing skills, not my protagonist. What did she mean no one hates themselves that much? I hate myself that much. She's not likable. Well, people like me. Another did not seem to understand when I associated a feeling with black. Black is a color, not a feeling. Hey, lady, want to trade brains? Of course, black is an emotion. Did she think Amy Winehouse's album Back to Black was about a fashion decision? Normally, that is pre-meds, would have triggered me to spiral down and check out of life for at least a week. This time, it just made me feel sorry for myself and the enormous amounts of time wasted trying to write. But as I beat myself up, I realized the critique was spot on in that I'm not always likable, and the inside of a bipolar brain is not a walk in the beach. It gets very dark and very ugly in there. So a new set of questions evolved. How do I submerge the reader into mental illness and make it palatable enough for them to continue reading? If a reader doesn't relate to Maggie's mental state, how do I make her likable enough that the reader doesn't put down the book after page 3? In a memoir, the author tells his or her story. In a novel, a reader is supposed to feel like they're in the story. I was starting to think a memoir would have been an easier option. Dun-da-da-da. I can't say I have great stick-to-itness or an undaunted spirit, but I kept writing, studying, and discovered that conferences are the best places to learn and get free advice. Then I reached the point I refer to as agent rejection period, when I learned, you're not going to believe this, that mental illness is overdone in the book market. No one is interested in publishing another mental illness book. My stomach fell. I felt like there was no hope. But a writing blog organized an online pitch with agents and editors. I got 3 requests for the novel and ended up signing with Black Opal Books, a boutique publisher out of the Pacific Northwest. My book was about to be born. On April 6, 2014, my books hit the shelves. Actually, translation, it hit Amazon. And let me tell you, publishing a novel is not for the faint of heart. And it is not like having a baby, I learned. Standard birth announcements read, Susan Sofayov gave birth to a 7-pound, 8-ounce baby boy on April 6, 2014. Now, imagine a baby announcement reading like book reviews. Susan gave birth to a 7-pound, 8-ounce ugly baby boy on April 6, 2014. His head is slightly misshapen and his ears stick out like butterfly wings. But she did a lovely job on the eyes. Unfortunately, his asymmetrical limbs overwhelmed the whole. All in all, a weak first-time effort. The dread of waiting for responses and reviews was horrible. The things that popped up in my imagination were unbelievable, especially when I found out that quite a few typos slipped through the final edit and into the book. The first reactions I received focused on typos and not content. Luckily, my book publisher does small first run print runs, and the mistakes were corrected in the second. The book did very well with the professional reviewers it was submitted to, but still my stomach churned. Then the emails started and the reviews on Amazon. I was invited to book groups, and people were eager to tell me their stories and their experiences with all types of mental illness. I became received as a safe person to confess that they or their family struggled with mental issues. I began to exhale as more and more positive ratings piled up on Amazon and Goodreads. But I'll confess, deep down, I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop and to read a review about how novel my novel is. I'm not sure if that's typical for all writers or the fingers of self-loathing breaking through the meds to get one last laugh on me. The top one that you're seeing on the screen, my daughter hadn't read a book in years, picked up a copy of Defective from the kitchen table and read it. After years of struggling with addiction and bipolar disorder, she agreed to go into treatment. Thank you. That was actually a text message I received from somebody who got my phone number through a friend and took the liberty to text me. The second one, I love this book. It's helped me to understand one of my dearest friends who lived with a mental illness and takes medication for it. I commend Susan Sofayov for writing such a gut-wrenching honesty while teaching us all a great big lesson about compassion. The woman that wrote this actually interviewed me on one of her webinars, and as a thank you, I sent her a copy of the book. And after reading it, that's what she posted online. The third one is very short, but it's probably one of the most touching ones, in that it came from a longtime friend who grew up on my street, who I hadn't heard from in years, and it was a Facebook message. I'm going to get help and hopefully have a happy ending like Maggie. The last one is a woman I don't know, living someplace I don't know where in the world. But she wrote, in Defective, I felt like someone finally understood what it's like to live in a constant state of self-loathing and a feeling that I was never good enough. Well, I did enjoy reading those, but like a smartphone, there was something I discovered that it can be equally as addictive. That was the Amazon bestseller ranking. I became so addicted to watching this number go up and down. For a while, I lost sight of my real goals. But life has a way of kicking you back into reality. So, thank you, Susan, for the novel you wrote. Words, characters, experiences, some of them your own, poured into a book. I hope you were planning on changing lives with your book, because if you only wanted to tell an amazing story, you set your sights too low and have far surpassed them. Your words changed me, changed my husband, marriage, and our family. I never would have connected the dots, and it may have taken years to get there if not for your story. So even if every review you get for Defective is bad, even if someone tells you they absolutely hated it, remember this email, remember my husband's story, and remember that your book saved his life. And if that is the only good thing it ever does, it is more than enough. This is just a portion of the complete letter. I opened one Friday morning. You can read the complete letter on my website, defectivethenovel.com. Click on Books Can Save a Life. But by the time I finished reading the complete letter, I was sobbing at my desk. As I said, my husband and I worked together. He was in the office with me, sitting at his desk. Now remember, this is the guy who's used to bipolar, Susan, so seeing me crying is nothing new. But he asked, "Why are you crying?" And I read the letter out loud. My tough Israeli husband turned to mush, tears in his eyes. You see, I know my book will never make the New York Times bestsellers list, but that one letter confirmed my dream did come true. My book helped someone. So no, a psychiatrist or a researcher or a doctor, but I am proof that everybody has a place in this war. Each one of us can win a battle, and those small battles will add up, compound, and someday we won't even remember that seeking help for mental illness carried a stigma. One final thing I would like to say. As for me, I wrote this book just as I started treatment. When I typed a sentence, I could still feel the episodes in my mind and translate them onto paper. I'm proud to say to you today that I couldn't write this book. I take my meds, I eat right, I sleep enough, and exercise, and I've been relatively stable for 7 years. I know that evil disorder still lives in my head, and if I let my guard down, it will take control. But I've won the battle because I no longer live in fear of my own brain. So thank you for giving me your time today. And again, thank you to the International Bipolar Foundation. This has been such an honor. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Susan, so much for sharing your personal story. While we're waiting for questions, I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on our website. So you can go back and review, or share it with a friend, family member, etc. If you have a question that you don't feel comfortable asking at this point, please email me at dbrown@ibpf.org, and I will be happy to share that with Susan as well. We'll just give you a few seconds for questions to come in. Well, possibly we don't have any live questions today. We do have a few. Oh, here comes one, excuse me. Okay, Susan, the first question would be, how long did it take you to accept that your life was different than it would have been with a clear mind?
About a year. I really struggled to get to know myself, and I did struggle with the could have beens, but between a year of therapy and support with my family, and I let it go. But as I said in there, my daughter was diagnosed, so that's really what switched my attention. I had to worry more about her not having regrets than me sitting here indulging in mine.
Excellent, thank you for that answer. The next question, first of all, Bob would like to say thank you and that you have something in common. He was diagnosed late in life at 51 with bipolar 1. And his question is, let's see, have you done any other treatment other than meds and therapy?
No, that has been working for me. I don't know what other type of treatment he would be referring to, if it's more holistic things, but no, I take my pills and therapy and exercise. I do a lot of exercising to relieve stress, and I also know that I'm an introvert by nature, and if I don't get my considerable amount of alone time, that it has negative effect on my bipolar. So I make sure I get a lot of that.
Great, thank you. The next question actually from Bob as well. What are your two most helpful coping strategies? I know you just named exercise, possibly another.
Exercise and writing. When I write, I get to leave me behind and focus on something else. And that usually helps me keep things in control in my own life. It's very therapeutic.
Excellent, thank you. The next question, actually a comment to begin, that this Liz really enjoyed your honesty today. And her question is, how easy was it to believe in medication, ongoing medication, and not to say to yourself that I'm better and I don't need that any longer?
That's not a challenge at all. I know I'm not better. My biggest fear on this earth is that someday those drug manufacturers will stop making this medication. I I I never have the feeling that I could do it on my own, because for 46 years I failed, and I know that I have my life today because I get up every morning and I hold those in my hand, and I am just grateful that they're manufactured. I don't struggle with that at all. In fact, when I talk to people and they tell me they have a mental illness of any kind or bipolar, and I'm signing books, that's the thing I write. You know, may your meds always work, and may the manufacturer continue making them.
Thank you for that answer. The next question is from Maria in Germany, and she is asking, she feels as if she's not equipped to deal with her husband who's been diagnosed. How or what advice would you give her um, in helping her deal and be compassionate with her husband?
Read the book. There's a lot of things in there that will give her a greater insight into her husband's thought process, and that she needs to know that there are going to be times when she has to remind herself that that is not her husband talking or doing, that that is an illness, and that there are going to be times that he will say and do things that she cannot take it personally. And what it takes in a lot of ways is building up a thick skin. And like I said in my talk, I wasn't really joking about the ugly Susan and the beautiful Susan. My husband deals best with me when he thinks of me as two different people, and he knows, you know, when I'm one way, this is how he can act, and when I'm another way, he knows, he puts up his guard and he protects himself from being hurt, and then he knows that I just need to be on my own. As far as I have so much, I understand so much what she's going through, having gone through it with my husband, and who is, by the way, the most outgoing, perpetually happy person on the planet. And I think some of that does rub off on me. But please tell her, I mean, a lot of people, not because I wrote it, but a lot of people told me that one woman came up to me at a book club meeting and she said, I feel so bad. I wished I had read your book. My ex-husband was bipolar. Too bad he died years ago. I mean, she got something from it. After all those years, she felt like she understood him a little better. And like I said, understanding is truly a tool that will help you in your dealing with your husband. I hope that answers her question.
Yes, thank you, Susan. The next question, were you impacted by self-stigma? Did you feel badly about having a mental illness, or was it just a relief to know what was wrong?
It was just a relief. It was just a relief. You know, when you live, I always thought, was I a drama queen? Like when I was first diagnosed, what I didn't talk about in my speech was my father had been run over by a train when I was in my early 20s. And that's when the severe chronic depression diagnosis came. And back then, they didn't prescribe anything for me. It was just, go to therapy. And so I accepted that. And I guess, so what I was trying to say, when somebody had something else to offer me, a possible other way out of the way my mind worked, I was just like, ready to break out in the jig in the street. That I was part of a group and I wasn't alone anymore. And that really made a big difference to me and the way I perceived myself.
Great, thank you. The next question from Liz is, do you have a set routine?
I do. I work from home, so I get up, come downstairs, drink coffee, feed the dog, and get to work. I pretty much do stick to, I go to bed early. I get up very early. My husband and I get up. We walk about 26 miles a week. We get up before the sun rises and start. And so before I even attempt to do anything, I've gotten some physical activity in that for me is a de-stressor, and I'm ready to start my day. And I swim an hour, 50 minutes to an hour, 4 to 5 times a week on top of that. Swimming is, for me, like meditation.
Excellent. The next question from Amy is, do you feel like you became a more confident person after writing your first book?
I don't think I'm ever going to be a more confident person, but I guess so. Yes, I became more confident in certain aspects of who I am, and there are certain aspects that I don't think I'll ever have confidence in. But I always say I'm not going for 100%. For me, 75% is great. It's better than what I had. And so in certain things, I've become very confident in since I wrote the book, and other things I'm still extremely intimidated by people. And that is one thing I struggle with, and I can't say that I've overcome that yet.
Thank you for that answer. The next question was, is there a hereditary factor, a mental illness in your family, or?
Yes, it's all hereditary. It's all hereditary.
Great, thank you. It looks like that's the last of our questions. And I want to say thank you again, Susan, for sharing. So wonderful to hear your story. And I know I've received a number of comments of how much this webinar has helped those listeners joining us today. So thank you again, and everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, it was wonderful. Everybody make it a great day, and I hope to see you at our next webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.